Welcome to question period in the Alberta Legislature. My name is David Carter, Speaker of the House and MLA for Calgary-Egmont. Currently, the Legislature is working its way through the various budget estimates of departments, and at the moment, 13 departments have been examined to some extent. This afternoon, after question period, the official opposition have designated the Department of Community and Occupational Health for a discussion with regard to this whole budgetary process.
Province is found in our people. We pray that native-born Albertans and those who have come from other places may continue to work together to preserve and enlarge the precious heritage called Alberta. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills. Tabling returns and reports.
Minister of Culture, Multiculturalism.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to table the Department of Culture and Multiculturalism's annual report for the year ending March 31, 1987.
Introduction of special guests.
Member for Stony Plain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure today to introduce to you and through you to my colleagues in this Assembly 51 grade 6 students from the Forest Green School in Stony Plain. They are accompanied by their teachers Doug Hamilton and Diane Lukey, parents Rick Mays, Lori Kirby, Buffy Bartley, Marlene McTavish, Val Wright, Karen West, and bus driver John Nielsen. They also have two special guests from England, Mrs. Meta Adlam and a retired minister from England, Desmond Spackman. They are situated in the members' gallery, and I ask that they stand and receive the traditional warm welcome of this Assembly.
Rocky Mountain House, followed by Edmonton Calder.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure today to introduce to you and through you to the Assembly 21 grade 5 and 6s from the Benalto School, and they're accompanied by their teacher, Audrey Bratberg, their parents, Lynn Lawrence, Darlene Adams, Lori Lemon, and their bus driver, Elmer Bratberg. They're seated in the public gallery, and ask them now to rise and receive the cordial welcome of the Assembly.
Edmonton Calder, followed by Red Deer North, followed by Edmonton Kingsway.
Mr. Speaker, it is my pleasure today to introduce to you and to members of the Assembly 30 grade 6 students from MacArthur Elementary School, located in the constituency of Calder. They are accompanied by their teacher, Mr. Dame, and parents, Mrs. Liskey, Mrs. Ilnicki, and Mrs. Atkinson. They are seated in the public gallery, and I would ask that they rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to introduce to you today 4 citizens from Red Deer. Craig and Rita O'Connor are involved in Red Deer in some of the province's social programming, both at the Michener Centre and in the community and youth development work. And they're here today with their children, Patrick and Natalie. And I'd ask them all to stand and receive the warm welcome of this Assembly.
Edmonton Kingsway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today it's my pleasure to introduce to you and through you to all the members of the Assembly 32 grade 6 students from the St. Pius School. They are accompanied by their teacher, Mr. Ron Huber, and an aide, Mrs. Shirley Haight. I request that they stand and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, I have some interesting figures regarding home care, Mr. Speaker. Home care costs the taxpayers about $4 per day. Put another way, the same as a working person pays for lunch in a fast food restaurant. Nursing homes cost about $36 per day, perhaps the cost of a playoff hockey ticket in a good seat. Mr. Speaker, auxiliary hospitals cost about $114 per day. That might be dinner for two at a downtown restaurant. And finally, acute care hospitals cost hundreds of dollars per day. It might be a whole weekend at the racetrack. Mr. Speaker, knowing this, would the Premier explain why this government refuses to adequately fund health care in this province?
Well, obviously, Mr. Speaker, all of the facilities that the Honourable Leader of the Opposition is referring to are necessary in our province. The government funds them, and funds them to a greater extent than any province in Canada.
Mr. Speaker, that's interesting. Maybe he wants to talk to his junior minister, the Minister of Occupational Health and Community Health, because he said yesterday that we have to quit building more buildings and provide more for community health care, community care, Mr. Speaker. That's the minister. My question is on this, who is speaking for the government? Is the minister wrong and the Premier speaking for the government that we are adequately funding community care in this province?
Mr. Speaker, surely the Leader of the Opposition would know that every minister, every department would like funds to do everything you'd possibly want to wish to do and provide to Albertans. That's natural, and I would want my ministers to do that. But obviously, too, someone's got to worry about the Alberta taxpayer. Surely isn't the NDP or the Liberals, but we have to worry about the Alberta taxpayer and not load him up and not load more and more debt on him as they loaded on the people of Canada over the years and those two governments in Ottawa.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier is missing the point. Community care saves money for this government. That's the point he was making. Get it? So my question then to the minister maybe understands this a little better than the Premier. The minister yesterday indicated that the province should provide more care in the community, and I agree with him. But I would say that he's being insincere, because if he believed this, why is it that we are spending less in this year's budget than we did 2 years ago in community care? Why is that?
Mr. Speaker, just before my colleague, the minister, answers the question, I want to say to the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, this government understands completely. That's why we provide all of those facilities. That's why we provide all of those facilities to the people of Alberta, and why we do it with an amount of money unparalleled in this nation.
Mr. Speaker, I want to take up the Honourable Premier's support and the Honourable Leader of the Opposition's question and say that I'm very proud of the efforts that our government puts forward, providing home care, providing community care for a number of citizens throughout this province. And yes, I am a strong advocate of community care, in particular in providing funding for home care, which this province has doubled its commitment to home care funding over the last 4.5 years. And it's my objective, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that we continue that trend.
Mr. Speaker, I point out again, they're spending less now than they did 2 years ago. Some commitment. But my question to the minister is, in some of the places they're facing, some of the home care programs are facing a crisis situation. I'm sure he's well aware in Calgary they're running a deficit of $90,000 per month. Now, rather than talk is cheap, Mr. Minister. What is the minister doing about that? Is he basically saying to the Calgary Board of Health that they can balance their budget by telling seniors, tough luck, there's no money, but they can go look for institutional care? Is that what they're saying to these people?
Yeah. Mr. Speaker, we're saying nothing of the kind to the Calgary Board of Health. And as a matter of fact, officials in my department are meeting tomorrow with officials from the Calgary Board of Health. But, Mr. Speaker, I want to comment on the Honourable Leader's questionable, as usual, questionable research. He's gone to the Calgary Herald to find research there. If he'd gone and found out his facts, he'd know that the actual home care caseload in the city of Calgary has increased some 35 or so since before the nurses' strike occurred. and that during the nurses' strike, the increase in caseload, increase in caseload did increase, but our government, as was promised, supported that increased caseload and has provided funding to the Board of Health to help them with that caseload.
Sorry. The chair will now recognize the Leader of the Opposition for the second main question. The line of questioning is really dealing with the estimates that have been designated for later this afternoon. Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to designate my second question, to the member from Edmonton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I too have some questions about the inadequate funding for home care directed to the Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care, whose estimates are not up for debate today. Our research, Mr. Speaker, has shown that if hospitals begin to look at hospital home care programs, that for an expenditure of about $3 million, almost $65 million could be saved annually in hospital expenditures for patients who are inappropriately or placed in hospitals or who are there for an extended period of time. What research has the Department of Hospitals and Medical Care done to demonstrate the accrued savings to the taxpayers of Alberta for having hospital home care programs aimed at reducing the length of stays of patients in active treatment beds?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is not aware, I guess, that home care programs operated by the Edmonton-Calgary Boards of Health and by 15 other health units throughout this province do provide home care services to active treatment hospitals. In most cases, Mr. Speaker, there is a very direct link between the active treatment hospital administration, the nurses, the doctors, and the home care nurses. In fact, I visited last Friday afternoon at a hospital in Beaver Lodge where the hospital board chairman, the administrator, and one of the doctors in attendance said they had an excellent relationship between the two home care nurses who worked with the South Peace Health Unit and the hospital in terms of moving people out even for a shorter period of time as a day or two, sending them home earlier so that there would be less cost to the active treatment hospital. I could just add, Mr. Speaker, if the honourable member hasn't had an opportunity to read it, he should read the report, A New Vision for Long-Term Care, Meeting the Need, which has a number of recommendations in it which are now being followed up, many of them actively by both staff in my department and Community and Occupational Health, and also the chairman of the committee which developed this report, the honourable member for Calgary-Glenmore.
Well, yes, Mr. Speaker, it seems one of the recommendations is that the Minister of Hospitals takes over home care delivery in the province. And I'm talking about that kind of policy. Is it the position of the Minister that hospitals themselves take over home care programs, as a proposal from Foothills, that they do cardiac home care out of the cardiac unit at the Foothills Hospital, or that postnatal programs out of obstetrical units take mums home early, or that palliative care programs take dying patients home early, that they be nurses from the hospitals, not from the health units doing that?
Mr. Speaker, the recommendation in the long-term care report is that home care be a dedicated funded program under a single division of some department, not necessarily a single department. The report also recommends that the delivery of home care services continue to be by agencies which presently deliver the services. Just because you fund home care services from one particular division doesn't mean that the delivery of home care services have to come under that area. So there's no anticipated change with respect to the funding, or the delivery, I should say, of home care services. It's anticipated that would continue to be by the existing agencies and organizations that are in the field delivering home care, and I might add, doing a very good job.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the MyROS report says that the demand for home care services far exceeds the supply, particularly for long-term care patients who are being deinstitutionalized. So you've got it in your report that there should be more funding for home care services. So how can the minister recommend that to the UVille program, for instance, which has as its mandate the deinstitutionalization of elderly out of long-term care centers into the home, how can he recommend they do that when they don't have money in the health units to fund home care services when the people get out, for heaven's sakes?
Mr. Speaker, we'd appreciate very much if the honourable member would take an opportunity to take a broader look at the whole field of care for our elderly citizens. That's what this report does, and it was commissioned by this government because we are anxious to find some long-term policy solutions to the care of elderly people. We do believe very strongly that we have the best long-term care program in Canada now. We want it to be even better, and the directions which are recommended here are presently the subject of public discussion, will be for the next couple of months, and then we want to come back after having that input from all of the caregivers and all of the people involved in the field. After having that important input, come back and finalize this into government policy and move forward with a number of these recommendations. In the meantime, some which we know have extremely broad support, for example, the project of moving the so-called bed blockers out of hospitals in Edmonton and Calgary, we are proceeding with at any rate. But we want to make sure that we have broad community support and cooperation for these initiatives before we move ahead.
Cutting the Peter Parks money.
And all of the players are saying they need more money to do it, particularly more money for home care services, Mr. Minister. Will the Minister personally investigate the needs of a Marjorie Reed of Calgary, who instead of being admitted to a $500 a day bed in a hospital in Calgary, decided to receive care at home, but waited up to 2 weeks for home care and homemaking services?
Mr. Speaker, if the honourable member will look at the recommendations from page 60 through to page 63 on the long-term care report, you'll find that recommendation number 7.5 recommends that a pilot project be developed immediately to find ways to move people out of expensive active treatment hospital beds who've been accessed for longer-term care, either back into the community, into lower-cost auxiliary hospitals or nursing homes. That pilot project is currently underway in Edmonton with a committee chaired by the honourable member for Calgary-Glenmore, with the honourable member for Cyprus as a member of that committee, along with two other individuals who have been working throughout the course of the last couple of weeks. In fact, visited the Misericordia Hospital for some length of time last week, and we'll be visiting other hospitals in Edmonton over the next 2 weeks. So there's action going on in the very area that the honourable member is talking about. Fortunately, I suppose he's aware of that, otherwise he wouldn't have thought to raise it.
To Edmonton Goldbar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Clearly, the minister understands there are dollar savings in health care through a move towards home care. The Myrosh report speaks to it. The Minister of Community Health speaks to it. Will the Minister of Hospitals and Health Care now produce for the House an immediate proposal and a budget as to how we can fulfill these objectives? The time for talking about it is over, Mr. Minister.
Well, I take rather strong exception to the suggestion that the time for talking about long-term care is over. I don't think it is at all. As a matter of fact, I think the best decisions with respect to how we care for our elderly citizens are made after you put before all of the caregivers and those involved some options that are well thought out. And that's what these are. And then we get a response that will allow us to come back and say there's something we didn't think of, or there's a different direction we can take in one or two of these areas. And that may not meet the time frame of the honourable members of the opposition to do something without giving any thought to it, but we think it's a responsible way to go.
Member for West Loch Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, my question today is to the Minister of Municipal Affairs and the Attorney General, Mr. Speaker. A couple of days ago, the Minister of Municipal Affairs told the Assembly that he would be doing something to reduce the exorbitant rise in liability insurance costs for local government due to the report he'd recently filed, and hopefully by September. And this is, of course, highlighted by the Alberta Hospitals Association announcing yesterday that their costs are going up another 30%. But also, Mr. Speaker, just a few weeks ago, the Attorneys General of 8 states in the United States have initiated legal action against members of the insurance industry for alleged conspiracy to limit coverage and raise premiums for municipal liability insurance in the U.S. and Canada. And for fear they may not have it, Mr. Speaker, I have 4 copies here that I can give the page if they'll come around to file. My first question then is to the Minister of Municipal Affairs. Was he aware that there was an action for collusion launched against the very same insurance companies of which our municipalities are expected to insure with just a few days ago in the U.S.?
Mr. Speaker, with respect to the question of the honourable member, I'm not specifically aware of the filings that he speaks to. They don't, however, bear a direct relationship on our consideration of support for recommendations regarding liability insurance for municipalities. It's our belief that we should assist the municipalities in reaching some conclusion as to whether or not self-insurance would be more beneficial than the current insurance schemes that they're involved with. And as I indicated on the previous day, I expect to be able to reach a decision in that regard by September of this year.
Not much help, Mr. Speaker, if you're dealing with a bunch of crooks. Would the Attorney General then tell us whether or not he is going to do something about the investigate or consider a similar action?
Mr. Speaker, I'm aware that the Attorneys General in the United States of America have had under consideration the issue of liability insurance, and that was a topic under discussion in the annual meeting of Attorneys General last year in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, which I was unable to attend, although I had an invitation to do so. It is my intention, if at all possible, to attend, or if I'm not able to attend myself, to attend the annual meeting of the State Attorneys General, which will be held in early June this year in the United States. I will send a representative if I'm not able to attend myself. But in terms of a specific legal action launched in another jurisdiction outside Canada, I'm not in the position to comment on what might be underway. However, I should say this, that the commencement of legal action does not mean that a decision has been rendered, and if the Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party would care to consult with his legal expert sitting behind him from Calgary Buffalo, he would know that judgments come down after the matter has been dealt with in the court, so it is entirely inappropriate to prejudge matters of this kind.
Mr. Speaker, this isn't a party to go over and share booze with Attorney Generals down in the U.S. This was an action launched on March the 22nd, 1988. Has this Attorney General the interest of the public in Alberta and the hundreds of people out there in municipal government enough interest to at least look into launching an action when on page 57 on this action it mentions that Canada is one of the areas that's getting shafted? Surely he has enough information.
Thank you, Honourable Member, for your succinct supplementary. Mr. Speaker, as usual, the Liberal leader is offensive in his opening remarks. I know. The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party has replied to my remark that he tries to be offensive, and Mr. Speaker, he succeeds in most cases. And he has done so again today. If I attend conferences, I do so for serious purposes, and I think that while I am not certain that I will be able to attend, I certainly will consult not only with Attorneys General in the United States of America, but with the Attorneys General in Canada, and I can advise the Honourable Member that we have a conference scheduled for Quebec City in late May of this year, and the issue may very well be discussed at that time, although at this stage I have had no representations that it is necessary or appropriate to commence legal action or to commence any criminal proceedings, as the Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party seems to be suggesting, against any insurance company or set of insurance companies.
Right. Mr. Speaker, I'm suggesting he's asleep at the draw. Could I then divert this question, Mr. Speaker, to the acting Minister for Consumer and Corporate Affairs, the Minister of Transport, who I believe his responsibility is now for the Superintendent of Insurance, Mr. Speaker. Would he ask the Minister, or directly to the Superintendent of Insurance, to join or investigate the alleged collusion of insurance companies that are trying to offer more money, less insurance here in Canada as they are in the U.S.? Would he ask that department to look into it?
Mr. Speaker, I'll be happy to take that as notice and pass it on to the Minister in the department.
Main question for the representative party, the member for Clover Bar, followed by Bow Valley, Edmonton Avonmore, Edmonton Gold Bar.
Mr. Speaker, my question is the Minister of Technology, Research and Telecommunications, and this has to come from a question that we asked in 1982, and before that, the Honourable Member Bob Clark asked in 1980, and this is to do with government competing with the private sector. And I am pleased to see that the government has finally, AGT's finally got out of competition with the private sector. Now, my question to the Minister is, while I applaud the Department for doing that, is this a new direction for the government that they're going to indicate to Crown agencies to stop competing with the private sector, or is this just a small instance of this happening in this case?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Member for Clover Bar asks about competition and how or why Alberta Government Telephones made the decision to discontinue competition in the sound system business. I've already explained that Alberta Government Telephones examined very carefully about a year and a half ago the kinds of the direction of technology and also the directions for the corporation. In doing that, they determined as a commission that they did not need to be in areas that are well supplied currently by other private sector firms if those areas were not closely linked to telecommunications as such. And that's especially significant given that the technology is changing and there's a considerable amount of data processing and manipulation that occurs currently or is possible with telecommunications. The sound systems and freestanding personal computers were two areas that I understand they have determined were not in the future directions of Alberta Government Telephones.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the Premier. If you can't get the answer from the blocking back, maybe the quarterback will be able to tell us what the play is going to be. Again, Mr. Speaker, to the Honourable Premier, is this the start of a new policy? Is this a policy direction where we are now going to indicate to Crown corporations that where the private sector is serving the public and serving it well, that these government agencies will get out of direct competition wherever possible, as indicated with this small step about the freestanding computers?
Mr. Speaker, I'd only say that it's not a new policy. It's one we've been working on for some time.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if it's not a new policy, can the Premier indicate in which department directly that they will be giving direction that we don't want to be competing with the private sector? Or are we just going to let it go along?
Mr. Speaker, it's not to a particular department. It's to discuss both in our cabinet and our caucus. We believe that as a government, and we've been following that.
Thank you. Westlock Sturgeon.
Speaker, I detect a difference of opinion between the Premier and the Minister. Can I find out from the Minister, possibly, because the Premier is looking puzzled, what are the operative words and whether competition is allowed with the private sector, whether it is a function of the organization, of the public organization already, an extension of their principles, or whether or not it's competing with the private sector? Which are the operative words?
Well, Mr. Speaker, to the extent that I've understood the member for Westlock Sturgeon, first of all, I would want to clarify that the Commission, the Alberta Government Telephones Commission itself, discussed and came to its own conclusions about the future direction of Alberta Government Telephones. I can advise the honourable members that I did discuss with Alberta Government Telephones that direction, that future direction with the Commission. To the extent that the question, which is where I'm a bit lost, Mr. Speaker, asks whether there's going to be, or how to define what is a part of the basic telephone system. That's a judgment call that is being debated nationally. in the National Telecommunications Policy. It's also one that the Commission examines, and it's one that the Public Utilities Board as well looks at, and it is a moving target, Mr. Speaker, because the technology does change.
To the member for Calgary Mountain View.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister in regards to the latest annual report of AGT, in which there's a loss of nearly $20 million for the last 2 years in an affiliated company. Could the Minister tell us what was the nature of that loss? Did it arise from a partnership that AGT has with a private sector company?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't have great detail in terms of that subsidiary or partial subsidiary of Alberta Government Telephones, because I think it is a company that's owned 50% by the private sector. The nature of or the underlying cause, as I understand it, was some defective components which were purchased offshore and did give rise to some difficulties in warranting product. But apart from that, that problem has been corrected, was quite some time ago. Different sourcing has been obtained, and I have already given the honourable member the information I think that is identifiable with the question.
Member for Bow Valley, followed by Edmonton Avonmore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Agriculture. In 1986, the federal government came out with the Canada Special Grains Program. It was to assist producers of particular grains financially because of the subsidies in Europe and in the United States. Much to our surprise and disappointment, the forage producers were left out of this particular program, and inasmuch as the summer fallow is recognized as a crop rotation, and inasmuch as that a crop rotation is used with forage is used for a crop rotation, would the Minister indicate whether there's any chance now of the forage producers being in the present program?
Mr. Speaker, what the honourable member indicates is so correct, with one exception, and that being dehydrated alfalfa. Forage producers are not involved under the Special Grains Program. As the honourable member is aware, it is our belief that they should be included under the Special Grains Program because there is a correlation as it relates to forage production and depressed grain prices. To my knowledge, the federal government has not changed their position. To this date, the rule is, as I have indicated to him, only dehydrated alfalfa is included under the Special Grains Program.
Mr. Speaker, I would just like to ask the Minister, has the Alberta Department of Agriculture taken a stand on this situation, and could he indicate what the stand is?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we have indicated to the federal government our hope that they would include forage production under the Special Grains Program by way of letter, and I had an opportunity yesterday to reinforce that in conversation that I did have with the Minister responsible for the Canadian Wheat Board, the Honourable Charlie Mayer.
Mr. Speaker, I have a lot of forage producers in my area, and their next question to me is, and I pass it on to the Minister, is that short of the federal government including forage in the Special Grains Program, would the Alberta government be prepared to come up with some type of a program to assist these people?
Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member is aware, we have been extremely supportive of the forage producers within the province with programs such as the Farm Fuel Allowance, the Fertilizer Offset, our Farm Credit Stability Program. In addition to that, we have committed to date in excess of somewhere in the vicinity of $1 million for research activities. Last year alone, we made a commitment to them of some $316,000 for research activities. So we are very supportive to date of our forage production in the province of Alberta.
Mr. Speaker, it's obvious that as long as there's a subsidy on certain grains in the United States and in Europe, the special grades program will carry on. Could the minister indicate whether he is putting any pressure on the federal government to include it in a program in previous years?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we are going to continue to make strong representations to our federal counterparts as it relates to forage inclusion under the Special Grains Program. And as the honourable member has indicated, and I indicated in my opening comments, we believe there is a correlation. We're not sure if the correlation is direct as it relates to depressed prices, as there is also a surplus of hay in the province, as the honourable member is aware. But acknowledging that there is a correlation, it is our hope that there will be some recognition in the event that there is another special grains program for our forage producers.
Member for Vegreville.
Mr. Speaker, in terms of the obvious need for an additional payment this year under the Special Canadian Grains Program, if we're to believe everything we hear in this Assembly, farmers can thank the tough-talking Premier for Alberta for that program. And I'm just wondering if he's decided what the rate ought to be this year, what the level of payment for the Special Canadian Grains Program ought to be this year.
No, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes Edmonton Avonmore, followed by Edmonton Goldbar, and then Cypress Redcliffe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Attorney General, I've had a number of calls in regard to the Maintenance Enforcement Program. I recently spoke with a woman registered with the program in February of 1987 who did not receive her first payment until November of 1987, and as of March 1988 was $2,000 in arrears. A second woman reported her ex-spouse paid into the program with 4 NSF checks and is now $600 in arrears.
Okay.
Part of the problem is inadequate staffing for nearly 20,000 cases. Is the minister willing to commit himself to adequately staffing this program?
Mr. Speaker, the Maintenance Enforcement Program, as was discussed during the course of the estimates of my department as Attorney General, is a new program. It is getting off the ground with a fair degree of success, as I pointed out in the statistics I had available at that time. Certainly there are problems associated with the volume of work which has been encountered. We are doing our very best, as are the staff and my office, to try and deal with individual cases that are brought to the attention of myself or to honourable members, and many of the honourable members have referred those particular issues to me to try and obtain attention to them. We are, we believe, adequately staffed, but of course we are reviewing that new program with, as it proceeds in its implementation. We think it's succeeding generally well, although of course there are problems, similar with ones the honourable member has referred to.
For sure there are problems, and some of them are with the policies. Will the minister change the policy of holding checks to creditors for 14 days to ensure those from the debtor are not NSF, because the current practice punishes the innocent creditor for the fraudulent behavior of the ex-spouse or debtor?
And that is, of course, a matter of making sure that the funds are in hand before they're paid out. The funds which we handle in that way are basically in the nature of a trust fund situation. We can't pay out money that we do not actually have in hand. Certainly we will review whether or not that is an appropriate period which to hold the fund of the paper, the checks. Actually they're not held, they're deposited, and hopefully clear within that time. And in view of today's current banking practices, it may be possible to shorten the time. That will be taken under consideration. And it is a very good point. It's certainly easier to clear checks through now in a shorter period of time than that. At least mine normally clear faster than that.
Perhaps the Maintenance Enforcement Program could demand certified checks or money orders. Will the minister direct the administrator to vigorously enforce maintenance orders rather than merely seeking the cooperation of the debtor?
It's my understanding and my view that they do indeed vigorously attempt to enforce the payment. It's called the Maintenance Enforcement Program. And I think that given the
relatively new nature of the program and the relatively high volume, one has to look at the overall performance, and it's indicated to me that of the new registrations, collections are running over 90%.
My understanding is quite different. Will the minister direct the chief administrative officer to use the computer system to ensure that creditors can receive up-to-date information on the status of their account via the telephone, and that it be given in a courteous and a consistent manner?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I do believe the staff of the Department of the Attorney General are courteous in dealing with the public. If there are specific examples, I would certainly appreciate having that brought to my attention.
Edmonton Goldbar, supplementary.
Yes, supplementary, Mr. Speaker. When there is a court order to a recipient and the errant spouse has been located, will the minister take steps to pay the recipient at that court-ordered rate if a court intervention is then made by the errant spouse, which draws out for months and months any conclusion?
Under some circumstances, the honourable member is aware as to how the program works. It is possible for the government, through the Department of Social Services, to make payments which will assist people in being maintained over that period of time. But of course, members of this Assembly would have to vote considerable additional funds to the Department of the Attorney General to provide us with a pool of funds to accomplish the member's suggestion. At the same time, it must be noted that when these matters are in dispute before the court as to the level of maintenance, either for the spouse or for children, it is possible for the other spouse to apply from time to time to have the order varied. And that is a court proceeding which I would like to see shortened in terms of its determination, but I would certainly not want to see it taken away.
Main question, Edmonton Goldbar, followed by Cypress Redcliffe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this document speaks to differences in expectations, relationships between social and economic development and an environment for independence. The document, Mr. Speaker, could also be used to excuse, reinforce any government decision, action, or inaction. Mr. Speaker, more than noble statements and increases, however well acknowledged, in the minimum wage, the people of Alberta want a commitment from this government that immediately provides incentives for survival to the working poor, many of whom are women, who are suffering under successive blows and who are attempting now to maintain independence. My questions, Mr. Speaker, are to the Premier. Will his government reconsider such actions as the renter's tax credit deletion, the increase in Medicare premiums, which hit hardest on the working poor of the province of Alberta?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Medicare premiums were frozen this year. There was no increase. Also, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member would know that if you put in rental assistance when there is very few vacancies and where rents are abnormally high, it's needed then. But when there are many vacancies and when the rents are low, obviously a program isn't needed. And I must tell the honourable member that the constant push to spend is something governments just can't continue to do.
Mr. Speaker, accommodations for the working poor are still very much in short supply. Will the government now review the salary allocation for the STEP program? $5.50 an hour hasn't been looked at for years. Many people are trying to live year-round at that rate of pay.
Mr. Speaker, the STEP program is administered by the Minister of Career Development and Employment.
Mr. Speaker,
With regard to the STEP program, it will not be affected in that the minimum wages increase is coming forward in September, and we will be through the summer months. With regard to the priority employment program, there will be an impact in terms of total budget dollars, but I might point out to the honourable member that at $5.50 an hour, it is above the minimum wage, even the new levels.
Mr. Speaker, back to the Premier. Will the Premier then eliminate from the 0.5% surtax, income surtax, families who are existing below $20,000? This deals most harshly, Mr. Premier, with the working poor, the food bank users of our communities.
Mr. Speaker, I would review that with the Honourable Provincial Treasurer. I should remind the Honourable member that last year some 500,000 Albertans by selective tax reductions were removed from paying any tax at all or had theirs reduced, even when there were tax increases last year. This year, when taxes were cut and reduced dramatically in the province, the emphasis was on those people, on the people in the lower tax brackets, so that they get a far greater benefit. And that's something the government wanted to do to deal with the very problem the member raised.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Premier, that's not what the numbers show. Mr. Premier, finally, will the government open the process on this document called Caring and Responsibility that your government has tabled? Will you invite public input and discussions on this important document, its consequences, its ramification for programs before it becomes policy?
No, Mr. Speaker, it is policy. It's the government's policy, and as the honourable member said when she opened her line of questioning, she thought that the document provided excellent ability for... Sure, she did, Mr. Speaker. She may not have wanted to, but she said it. That it works very, very well in providing an opportunity for dealing with social care policy in the province.
Supplementary, member for Edmonton Norwood, Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, it may be that the Premier doesn't want to talk about spend, but he must recognize that there's a lot of people below the poverty level in this province. And one specific example, if I may ask the question I asked the Minister of Social Services, would they look at operating with the federal government under the Canadian Assistance Plan to at least help hungry children in our schools, and there are many of them. They will do it on 50% cost sharing.
Mr. Speaker, as the Minister of Social Services mentioned, that the government is working with families to make sure that they understand the best possible way to provide adequate food, nutrition for their children.
Member for Cypress Redcliffe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Agriculture, and it's related to the stabilization programs. And I wonder if the Minister can inform the House after his meeting in Toronto some weeks ago if there's anything further in the stabilization program related to cattle or to beef.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to share with the House that after our recent meeting in Ottawa with the federal minister and the provincial ministers, whereby we're hoping to have greater provincial participation of the provinces that are presently not participating in the tripartite programs, that there was general agreement as it related to the participation of provinces in the event that they involve themselves in a national program. It was important that they withdraw their own provincial programs. There is still debate going on as to what provinces might join, but we are hopeful that there will be a greater provincial participation in what we consider a truly national program.
I wonder, Mr. Speaker, if the Minister can inform the House if there's, in his feelings, the discussion with Saskatchewan, if it's any closer to them joining the program, because as a MLA along the border, it does distort to some extent our cattle market.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, there is an indication by the Premier of Saskatchewan, who also serves as their Provincial Minister of Agriculture, and a willingness whereby he is examining ways whereby hopefully he can participate in the National Tripartite Stabilization Program. As the honourable member is aware, they do have their own provincial stabilization program, and the Premier of that province indicated his willingness to examine his entry into the national program.
I wonder, Mr. Speaker, if the minister can inform the Assembly what percentage sign-up we have under the beef stabilization program related to cattle, feeder cattle, and cow-calf.
Time to question period has expired. Might we have unanimous consent to complete this series of questions? Opposed? Carried. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I don't have those figures at my fingertips, and I'm not quite sure whether the honourable member is referring to participation on a national basis or whether he's referring to the participation rate of our individual Alberta producers. But on a national basis, under the majority, if not all, we have in excess of 50% of the production of the areas that are effective involved in the tripartite programs. On a provincial basis, as it relates to our slaughter cattle, I believe it's somewhere in the vicinity of 80%. I should share with the honourable member also that we are working with the federal government as it relates to the bringing forward of a program for the honey producers also in the province of Alberta.
I wonder, Mr. Speaker, if the minister can inform the Assembly of the sign-up related to the dry bean stabilization program, the percentage sign-up of Alberta participants.
Mr. Speaker, here again, I regret I don't have those figures at my fingertips, but I will get them back to the honourable member. That was our latest entry into the tripartite program, and we're delighted. The acceptance level has been very great as it related to that.
Athabasca Laklabish, followed by Westlock Sturgeon.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, is the Minister of Agriculture lobbying the federal government to increase the payout for the cow-calf producers under the red meat stabilization plan?
Mr. Speaker, no lobby of the federal government is required because it's a tripartite committee that establishes the costs as it relates to a payout and the costs also as to what is going to be included into the cost of production. We are working as one of those participants on the committee to increase the cash costs as it relates to the cow-calf production within the province.
Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the minister, view the fact that the penetration of the American market goes down considerably as the Canadian dollar moves up, and it's been moving up fairly rapidly, Mr. Speaker. Could the minister tell the House whether or not in the stabilization plan there is any process factored in that would cover the industry as their export markets towards the U.S. dried up?
Mr. Speaker, the program relates directly to price and input costs as to what it has been the previous years. It does not relate directly to export of our livestock, but in the event that there is a dry up of that livestock export market and the price is depressed, it naturally would trip into effect so that there presumably would be a payout under the program. As the honourable member is aware, as it relates to slaughter cattle, there was a payout for the last quarter of 1987. We are projecting that there will be some payouts under the red meat sector for 1988.
Orders of the day.